Hello and welcome to Digerati Talks. I want to give a special welcome today to our Digerati community joining us on the stream. We are so excited to have you with us. My name is Simon and I'm an engineer here on the Open Network team at Life.church. I have been so looking forward to today's talk. In 2008, Life.church launched one of the first 200 apps in the entire App Store, the YouVersion Bible app, with 80,000 downloads that first weekend with just a single developer building the app. Today, YouVersion just celebrated their 10-year anniversary and 338 million downloads over every single country on the planet. The team has grown to almost 40 full-time staff members and hundreds of volunteers. Just a few weeks ago, we launched a brand new app called Bible Lens, transforming your photos into profound, biblically based, artistic, shareable images. The app reached number 2 in the entire US App Store, just behind YouTube. And today, I can share some behind-the-scenes news that we just launched the Android version yesterday afternoon. YouVersion continues to grow due to God's blessing and the team's constant innovation. Today, I'm excited to welcome to the stage Todd Doberstein, the YouVersion Product Director, and Brad Ballou, Senior YouVersion Engineer, to walk through transitioning to using feature teams. Please join me in welcoming Todd and Brad.
Great. Well, thanks for the intro, Simon. Welcome all of you guys watching with the live stream and all you guys here in the studio. Thanks for the support. Today we're going to be talking about the question that probably a lot of you have asked yourselves this morning when you woke up, to feature team or not to feature team. We'll quickly introduce ourselves before we get started within the discussion. Brad, I'll let you go first.
Yep, I'm Brad Ballou. If you don't know how to say that last name, that's fine. I've been on the YouVersion team for 5+ years, all on the API team that whole time, and loving it.
Yeah. So my name is Todd Doberstein. So I lead the product team and the support team with YouVersion. I've been here for almost 3 years now, and started my career down in Austin, Texas, in the tech space, and until God gave me a kick in the pants about 3 years ago to come up and join one of the coolest teams, I feel, in the world. As we get started in our talk today, wanted to start the conversation kind of with the why. What problem are we trying to solve when we talk about feature teams? The problem, as kind of we defined it, is, as Simon mentioned, we've been growing quite a bit with regards to staff, number of engineers, number of designers, number of product people, but then also number of products, apps, and features. And so as we grow, how can we be the best stewards of what God's given us? And so how do we improve the efficiency, but then also the impact across a lot of different features and products? So as we went into discussing organizing around feature teams, this is really kind of the key question and the key problem that we're trying to solve over the last year or so. So if we look back to 2017, early 2017, this is really kind of how we as a team were organized. So we had a single roadmap for really all of our products and features. This was obviously before Bible Lens, but we've got the Bible app for kids, Bible.com, a lot of internal tools that we developed, and everything was organized as best as possible within a single roadmap. And then our engineering team was really organized by components or by skill set. So front-end developers, iOS and Android, API developers, along with DevOps, back-end, and internal tools and web. So all of our engineers were really focused kind of by area of specialty, not necessarily by like specific product or by feature. And then we do 2-week sprints as a YouVersion team. And so all of our sprints, our sprint planning, our sprint reviews and retrospectives were all just one single large meeting where we went through and did that. And as we grew, we were kind of going through and figuring out, is this the best way to organize? Is this the best process for us as a team to be able to get as many features out that impact users as possible? So that's when we kind of started talking about really two different ways to organize. And so this slide here kind of gives you really the component team structure and view, which is kind of what we were operating at early 2017. Then kind of the feature team model, which is what we've kind of been the last year or so been working towards. So it's fairly simple to understand, but you can see here, like on the left, we've got all of the different product items, whether this is a feature or a product. These are different projects that are product focused that we need to have implemented. And then all of our engineering teams, and even you throw in designers, they were all kind of bucketed by area of expertise. So when a certain feature required iOS, Android, web, backend API, and DevOps, to be able to coordinate all those different resources became kind of difficult. So we were able to obviously do quite a bit, and especially with big, large features, we were able to do and really get the team going in big, large features. But with regards to doing multiple features in parallel, became more and more difficult to parallelize features. And so that's when we started talking about the idea of feature teams. And so this is, just like it sounds, on the right side you can see, rather than organizing engineering and product resources by area of expertise or by component, we basically take all required components to build a feature, organize that, and then from a product perspective, when we go and work on a feature, you've got one team that can work really closely together to hopefully be more effective at rolling out features. So this is, at a very high level view, this is kind of before and what we're working towards with regards to after, from kind of how we're structuring our product and engineering organizations with YouVersion. So over the past year, we've been working and transitioning. And so what we thought we'd like to do is really just share some of the successes and failures and lessons learned throughout this process for the rest of our talk today. So one takeaway that we wanted to talk about was getting the MVP down to a minimum. So MVP stands for minimal viable product. And so this is something that isn't necessarily just for feature teams, but as we've started splitting into feature teams, we've learned a lot about how to get really good at taking what you think is an MVP and actually stripping it down even more. So as a product guy, I've learned a lot over the past year with regards to, I think we're really close to having the minimum viable product, and then we're not even close. And so I think that's one thing that we've learned, and some resources that we've used along the way. One is something that's pretty simple. This is a chart that kind of shows value and complexity. So regardless of whether you're on a product or an engineering team, I think this is something that could be useful to really anybody. You're thinking about multiple projects, multiple problems that you're trying to solve. How do you prioritize and figure out what to do first? So if you kind of, as a team, look at two areas, value and complexity, should be able to help you figure out what the highest priority or what the highest return on your investment will be. So here we kind of define anything that has a high value and a low complexity, something that's easy to do, as an easy win. So those are the things that should get to the top of the list pretty quickly. Then up the upper right, high value and high complexity, that's a big bet. So it has high value, but it could take a lot of work to get there. So there's only a few of those that you could potentially do at a time. The bottom left are maybes, so low value, but then also low complexity. And then the bottom right, there always has to be a loser. So high complexity, low value. And so this is something that we talked a lot about with just how we prioritize the roadmap and features. But as we went into feature teams, we actually ended up using this for how to actually decide what is MVP, what things are the highest value and the lowest complexity. And Brad, I know you kind of had some experience with using this tool that we've developed to prioritize.
It's been an eye-opening tool to use. I've really Appreciated. Todd created this for us, introduced it to our teams. When we were starting, you'll see a little bit later, one of our iterations, we did like a 2-month trial of a feature team. So we spent our first week in this spreadsheet talking about, laid out all our ideas, then you vote on it as a team. So as an engineer, something I may think, oh, this is a big win, like we need to do this. Then you get other people's input and you realize your awareness wasn't where it should have been. You're like, oh, well, I guess that's kind of a loser. So it was a good sheet and exercise to go through as an entire team with engineering, product, and everything, just to bring awareness on what should we really try to tackle.
Yeah. And we'll be sending out a link to this specific tool after the presentation. But in a nutshell, what this allows you to do is to take key stakeholders from the team and vote on what you think different features or different items have as value. Get an average for that, but then also let the engineering team or the people that are going to be doing a lot of the implementation work, allow them to have a say in what the amount of work or level of work is going to be. And that's something that's critical. A lot of times from a product perspective, you can try to put a roadmap together, but if you got a roadmap that you're putting items on that have dates and you haven't talked to your engineering team, like that's really a big no-no. And this kind of allows us to formalize making sure that, hey, we've got at least level of complexity at a high level determined before we start talking about when things will need to ship.
Right, because sometimes products like, that's just a button. Just do it. And you're like, no, that is not just a button. That is a major complex feature.
Yes, a product would never do something like that. So like in general, with trimming the MVP, along with obviously the prioritization, here are 3 things that we also kind of learned over the past year that have helped us get an MVP down to its minimum, but also something that's very impactful to users. So one, and this kind of connects with the feature teams, keeping teams small is pretty critical. This is where, and it really connects to me with, so one of our Digerati axioms is innovation happens when passion meets constraint. And so really with regards to keeping the team small, but then also putting a date out there, I think both of those things can really help you as a team get focused and prioritize as much as possible. And I know, Brad, you and I were talking about agreeing on a date. What does that kind of mean to you?
A date can be stressful, I think, for an engineer, but it can actually, I think, be your best friend if you use it well. So the important part of this is agree on a date, because it's not just the way it worked historically for us was product or leadership would come and say, we want this and we want it by this date. And then we had to figure it out as engineers, whether that meant working overtime, whatever you have to do. Now they're asking us in advance for feedback. When can we get this done? So taking your time and energy and putting some of that before you're actually writing code into planning and thinking about it is really useful. Then also, one thing we did a lot with Plans with Friends and some feature teams is throughout the process, re-agreeing on the date. So we'll touch a little bit more on that later. But the earlier, as an engineer, you can give feedback to the product team, like, oh, this took a little bit longer than we thought. Is there something else we can cut to stay on date, or do we need to move the date? That sort of communication is vital throughout the entire life cycle.
Yeah. And one quick story where I thought this really played out well. So last year, when we had a plans team working on Plans with Friends, we also were trying to get out a feature called Streaks that we released last year in 2017. But because we had a lot of resources going on with Plans with Friends, we had a very minimal amount of engineering resources to try to kick off this new feature. We literally had an API engineer and a couple front engineers to try to get this thing out. And I remember conversations with Chris Vaughn, who's a lead engineer with YouVersion, about this negotiation. And we were able to strip down the MVP with engineering's help and input, and actually go from the idea of Streaks to implementation in around a 2.5 month time frame, really because of kind of these features or these 3 points. And that was, I think, pretty critical. And one thing we ended up actually giving away from an MVP perspective was just offline functionality for Streaks, which we have now. But we've kind of learned too, you don't have to throw everything out there right at the beginning. Throw out the minimum amount to get the thing going, see if it works, and then you can invest more over time.
And if you throw it out there first, you can gather data to see if those things you wanted to add are even useful.
Yeah.
Such as one we found out that wasn't useful after the fact was a start date with Plans with Friends.
Yeah.
So we spent all this time and added complexity, allowing people to schedule the start date in the future, and then the vast majority never used that feature.
Yeah.
So it was like,
Yeah,
that felt like a
that's
little
very
waste
true.
of
That
time.
was definitely a failure on my part from a product perspective. Is like, oh, we think we have it down to a minimum, but after we ship the product, it's like, man, this part took like probably a couple months to do, and people aren't even using it. It's like, yeah, that's a big lesson learned and kind of a failure with regards to, okay, how do we prioritize things? But we've learned, I think, from both good and the bad with trimming the MVP. So takeaway number 2.
Yeah, the story behind this will take just a minute. So we started Plans with Friends. They were like, well, how long is this going to take? So I did my goes intos and all my figuring and be like, well, I think we can have this done in 8 to 9 months. It was a large project. We had some technical debt to work through. So then the next question they asked, well, can you create all the JIRA tickets for the 8 to 9 month project? In my head just hurt thinking about it. And after spending a couple of days, Alex and I spending all day trying to think through everything we had to do for 9 months and doing nothing but creating JIRA tickets, like the frustration level was really high, as you might imagine. So what we decided is like, okay, well, why are they asking us to do this exercise that seems kind of unnecessary and frustrating? So then going to leadership and saying, why do you want this? And them saying, well, we need to track your progress. You said it's going to take 8 to 9 months. We need to know if we're behind schedule or what. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we came up with, we hadn't really done alpha releases prior to this feature internally. So it's when you want to launch something, sometimes there's a lot of value in taking a really large feature public all at once, right? But that's really hard to do on a dev cycle. So we committed to 4 alphas, I believe it was, and we committed to a date on when we would have the next alpha to product and leadership for them to play around with. So it let us say, okay, we're going to make these 2 things work, and the rest of it isn't going to work. It's going to be broken buttons. We don't want to hear bug reports on stuff that doesn't work, but the parts that we do have done, test that thoroughly for us, give us your feedback, what you like, what you don't like. So it also allowed iteration a lot earlier in the process than going dark for 8 or 9 months building something and then getting feedback at the end. So we really were able to iterate a lot earlier. It was huge for us.
Yeah, and I think, and Brad kind of led this charge. And I think one thing too is when you're thinking about feature teams and smaller teams, like, man, is it possible to get bigger features out? And I think this represents a great solution to having a small set of team members be able to work on something big, but then also have some milestones along the way to help with kind of morale and determine progress. First data talk. So takeaway or lesson number 3. So plan for complete coverage. So earlier this year, we actually were working on 2 different features of the Bible app. So we had created 2 feature teams. And team 1 was achievements. We were working on actually streaks and adding, since streaks had done such a great job at driving daily active users for the app, we're like, okay, let's pour more into this feature. So that's when we came out with perfect weeks. And so the team 1 was really focused on that. Team 2, plans is obviously a big area of the app, and so a big goal for the year was to increase plan engagement, so we were working on that as well. And so this was really kind of, from a Bible app perspective, the work that was happening. So I guess I'll throw a question out to the audience. What, if anything, do you think could be a problem with having one Bible app team focused on achievements and one Bible app team focused on plans?
Tim knows, he's just not saying anything.
Hint, there are more than these 2 features in the Bible app. So, Yeah, so this is one thing that we've learned through error is being able to plan as much as you can for complete coverage kind of your products and of your features. And so, case in point, a bug came in that was connected to the Bible or connected to the reader part of the app. It's like, okay, well, what team works on that? We have a back-end problem with, let's say, with user's profile. What needs to happen? Who needs to work on that? And so that's something as we've gone on and kind of altered how we are doing feature teams. One thing that we've tried to be much better at is defining and being very clear on ownership of features, because feature teams are great at keeping a team focused. But if something comes in that's not in an area of jurisdiction, it could throw a lot of things off. And then finally, takeaway number 4. So be ready and willing to let go. And so I think this is really across the board, but I think especially with us as a team who you think 4 or 5 years ago we were engineering-wise a third or a fourth of the size as we are today. So senior engineers like Brad have literally touched all parts of different APIs over the years. And this is where kind of an area where I thought Brad could kind of talk through kind of how to go about being willing and ready to kind of let go of your baby, of your code into other hands.
I'm still figuring it out. So this is something I've taken feedback on personally because it's hard. You may have worked on something for close to a year. You poured a lot of your time, energy, effort into it, and then it's not your responsibility anymore. Maybe you switch feature teams or feature teams realign, and it needs to go to somebody else. And so just learning that the mission is number one, and that your code doesn't belong to you. It's part of this greater whole, and empowering others to speak into it is really good. It's not easy, but you can't take it personal when it's like, oh, we want to take this and give it over here. Okay, all right. Well, you'll find something fun and meaningful to do outside of that thing you've been working on. There's always new fun projects to work on. So it's a challenge. Just don't take it personal and keep the mission first, I think helps with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. So those are really kind of all of our takeaways and lessons learned that we went through. Kind of want to leave us with Scripture, because all of this really is about stewardship. The amazing success of the Bible app for kids, it's all a blessing from God. And we know from a YouVersion team, we've got a lot of responsibility with all that blessing to make sure that we're stewarding the resources that God has given us correctly. And so we're trying our hardest to make sure that even through process and organization, that we're doing as good as we can to steward the resources that God's given us. And when I think and we think about feature teams, that's really the end of the game with regards to, at a high level, we're trying to figure out how to best steward and take care of all the resources God's given us. So that's it for our talk. Now we would love to open it up to the online audience and the audience here with questions.
Some Q&A time with you guys. Hey, can we give it up for Todd and Brad for being here? And we are going to do some questions, so we can do some right here. So you guys feel free. It feels studio in here for those that are out there, so that's good. We're thinking about you completely. But I want to have everybody relax in here to say what's some questions that we can bring. Also, if you're online, you can put them in the, I'm looking at some people that are also online with you, and they will get those questions to us. We've got maybe about 8 minutes to take some questions. So any questions? How are we able to tell increase in efficiency with the feature teams? Is that right?
That's a fantastic question. So it's not simple, but with everything that we do, obviously we've got key metrics and KPIs as a team, and so really the organization around feature teams is really to organize all resources towards impactful features that we hope will drive engagement. And so our hope is through the work of feature teams, our key metrics like plan engagement, like daily active users, like we'll be able to actually to see an impact on our overall KPIs because we're able to actually get out more features and more updates that are connected to user-facing impacts than we were before. So that's kind of the goal is to really line it up and tie it back to our key objectives as a team.
Right. That's good. Anybody else? Questions? In the room?
What techniques have worked well to keep the two feature teams from stepping on each other's toes? So everything from merge conflicts to sort of more ideological, how do you set things up?
Could you restate that question too as you answer?
Yes. What are some key things to keep the feature teams from stepping on each other's toes? It sounded somewhat technical, but also just where product overlaps. Is that right? Technically, one thing that's worked well for us, a little bit before this, we had, as a team, read together a book about microservices. So before, all our code was in one giant repo, and we're breaking these out. We're kind of aligning each feature with a new service. So it's a new repository, new CI/CD, and everything for that feature. That's worked really well for us. On the API team, I think on clients, it would be a little bit different because you got to package it up and ship it to the App Store or deploy your code. So that's kind of helped us, technically speaking, is by breaking our large, what we called monolith, into smaller repositories and pieces of code.
Yeah, and from a product and process perspective, we started a year ago with a single roadmap, a single sprint planning review cycle, but now we're basically going towards completely parallel path process. So different roadmaps per team, per product, and then also separate sprint planning, separate sprint review and retrospective for the different teams. And so that will hopefully help create kind of borders as well to let the teams kind of focus and not get too worried about kind of what's going on.
Yeah, one more thing on that. So on our end too, one thing that, and maybe you lose a little bit of efficiency in that not everybody knows how everything works or where all the data is and what you already have. So, for example, there was one earlier this year, we made some slightly redundant data, stored it in two different tables. It ended up not being a big deal, and we just rolled with it. But thinking in hindsight, we've tried to improve communication as a component. What we call component would be an API, like you work on this kind of thing. And if we can improve that communication through stand-ups together, through we've scheduled like some shared coding time where we normally sit with our feature team, but once a week we'll go sit just with the other API devs so we can learn from each other and talk about, I'm doing this or I need this, see if anybody else has solved the same problem. But we're still kind of figuring that out.
All right. Any other questions? You got any from Owen?
Any problems or issues with feature teams that you haven't actually figured out solutions to yet?
Any problems or issues with the feature teams that you actually haven't figured out yet?
There's problems we haven't even figured out yet. I mean, we don't know what all the problems are, right? We don't know. We're still iterating.
Yes. I think one thing that I know that's been a challenge and a concern from an engineering standpoint, like as product and engineering has talked about this transition, is the term technical debt and kind of foundation work. That there's a lot of work that happens and needs to happen that isn't necessarily a user-facing feature. And so I'm not going to put that on a roadmap. If it's not going to help the user, it's like I don't know what to put on the roadmap. But I know that there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen as we're going, let's say, from API 3 to API 4 and how we migrate. And so that's one thing that we're still figuring out is how do we, at the end of the day, we just need to create margin for that. How exactly we do that is something that we're still trying to figure out, but I know that's something that we'll figure out at some point.
Yeah, they've encouraged us to create a roadmap for our API of things we need to get done, things we need to push forward in advance, and then share that with them so they can merge that in, and we can do a little bit at a time along with the feature roadmap. So I think that might work. We'll see.
But yeah.
Also, personal development. So one thing that's been a concern is I learn, and what I do, I'm going to learn and grow most from working with other developers that do a similar thing to what I do. And if I'm working all day with designers, iOS devs, web devs, it may be harder to develop my skills as a Python developer or learn Go or keep learning about infrastructure. So we don't have a good solution for that yet, but we're trying some things, and we'll see. We're aware of it.
Yeah.
It's good. Maybe a couple more. We have one? Okay.
Kevin Old asks, how do you approach knowledge sharing between teams?
How do you approach knowledge sharing between teams?
It's a good question. I think it kind of connects to what Brad was talking about a little bit. And so with regards to, I guess we could talk a little bit about the process of feature teams, but then also the organizational structure of our YouVersion team. So the thought is we're literally going to have these feature teams of, let's say, a designer, project manager, and then iOS, Android, front-end devs, back-end devs, like all sitting together and working together like day by day and planning their sprints out together. But it doesn't mean that the org chart has to look like feature teams look. And so from an org chart, we're going to be organized by kind of the different functions or components. So all the designers are organized together, all the API team, all the front-end team. And I think that will hopefully help us with regards to knowledge share across teams, that we have an organization and structure and a process for making sure that the API team is talking, even though they're not necessarily sitting and working together every day, but they're doing that over time. And the same thing with designers. So making sure that they're coming together and they've got time to learn and ask each other questions and give feedback on, hey, I've seen you design this feature. We'll continue to be getting feedback from other parts of the team, even though that you're not on the feature team. Not sure if you want to add.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer that scales really well, Kevin. Right now we have 6 API devs and a 7th starts next week. So like the twice a week stand up just for API devs to kind of share the problems they're solving and what they're working with is good for now. When we have 20 API devs, that probably won't work. I don't know. I guess we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah.
And maybe a larger part of the question too is there's at least in this room, so many of you that are Kevin, good to see you on the from Lifeway IT, awesome. But for all of our Digerati teams, that's something we're trying to answer as well. And from where we were, and that's part of what Open Digerati is all about. Open Digerati doesn't really represent a team. I sort of facilitate this idea, but we're all open at Digerati. It's really an initiative for us and a mindset shift that is part of your question too, is that we've done a lot of work on. I know product has worked together a lot with other product teams. We have a few product teams here, and there's a lot more collaboration happening and figuring out how does that work. Our engineering teams, hey, what are you working on across not just the feature teams in YouVersion, but even across the table with different products that we have, whether it's our open network or what we call interactive teams. So we do have more intentional meetings that happen, more intentional sharing. We, trying to use Slack better, things like that. But those are part of this, some of the challenges that we're still trying to answer for our whole team, because we do think that's very important and a part of what we're trying to do here. You know what? We're gonna close up here, and I do want to say this. What's cool is your last takeaway in the scripture, all about being faithful. For us in this room, what I like about these kind of moments, it just reminds us, no matter what we touch, no matter what we do. I love hearing from an engineer on just the reality of like I mean, this is my code, but it's not my code. I realize that, but what does that mean for the mission? And that's really when we started thinking about being open as a Digerati team, open Digerati, open source, open collaboration. What does that mean internally first as we're learning? And you can hear that from our team, and I love that about all of you, is that's the journey we're on, is we are committed to the mission, and we believe that we can do so much more together than apart. This is something that's driven our church for forever and drives our teams. So we're figuring out what that means. We love that we live in a world where tech is an open culture. And so as the church, I just want to encourage us that we're continually saying, hey, what does it mean for me to be open in the seat that I sit in? No matter where you are, whether you lead another product team. So that's intention. Stewardship is not only the intentionality of how we do things well, which I love about future teams, but stewardship is also, man, where do I let go and how do I empower others to be a part of this great mission that God's put us on, leveraging technology? I get excited about that, and so for those that maybe are new, Open Digerati, on opendigerati.com, we're going to do more of these. Our Slack channel, you want to join the community, it's a great way to say, what would you like to hear? Maybe you'd like to hear from our teams. We're going to have even more of these kinds of talks that are live, and then we'll have them recorded. We have our blog where we share. That's a part of what we're doing, is how do we share this knowledge with others? So not just sharing it with all of our teams, and not just the YouVersion team, but even with those that love tech and realize we can leverage this for the glory of God. How can we share what we're learning? And that's the heart of this. And you can find all that opendigerati.com. There's even a few projects that we have open sourced that are out there that are exciting. And then we even have more opportunities for people to join what's happening on YouVersion, our open network, interactive volunteers that are coming in saying, hey, I could be a part of this. And so you can check that out. But I just want you to know that that's our heart. That's the idea of what does it mean to steward? Because steward doesn't mean that we hold on to it and guard it. Stewardship for us, and if you look at the parable of the talents in the Bible, it means you invest it. It means that you're putting it where it gets the biggest return for the kingdom. And we're excited and we're thankful to be a part of a team where God is using it in huge ways, but we always say this and we believe it. We're just getting started. We really believe that in YouVersion, that we're just getting started. And that's why we know that someday it's going to be 20 API, and they might not all be sitting here. They might be all over the world, and how do we do that well together? So thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for sharing, and we will see you guys later.